Hello and welcome to Thoughts on Therapy. I'm Bryan Stevens, a licensed professional counselor with the practice in Marietta, Georgia, and the founder of TalkForward, who's bringing us this podcast today. I've been active in behavioral health for over 25 years, and in that time, I've met all sorts of knowledgeable people. Thoughts on Therapy is the show to bring their knowledge to the general public. Today, I'm really excited to be talking with Terry Wynne about career counseling and career coaching. Terry is a licensed professional counselor who's the owner of The Professional Edge, where she's helped over 2,000 clients ranging from the entry level to the executive level. The resumes and cover letters she has written have helped many of those clients obtain the jobs of their dreams. As a trainer, she's provided training to the national and state conventions, as well as to private industry, government, professional organizations, Norwegian Cruise Line, and Royal Caribbean Cruise Line. As a writer, her articles have appeared in numerous magazines, newsletters, and websites. And I found this interesting, she's been a voiceover talent and provided narration for commercials, videos, and websites. Lastly, she's been a talk show radio host and hosted her own weekly talk show radio program. And on a personal note, she has helped me launch and get these Thoughts on Therapy podcast started. So she's also been one of my mentors. So Terry is so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Right. So, well, let's get started a little bit because I think career counseling and career coaching is certainly a little bit different than what people think or think about doing. So, I wonder if maybe we could kind of start on kind of what it is that you do and why do people come to you as a career counselor and career coach?
I provide career counseling. I provide career coaching. And first of all, as a caveat, neither is considered mental health therapy, but people do need help with their careers, and they do come to me for a variety of different reasons. One of those is they say, quote, "I don't know what I want to be when I grow up." And I'm grown up.
Right.
So we address that, as well as sometimes they want to verify the career they think they want is the career that's best for them. Or they may need help with interviewing or negotiation and salary negotiations, or help with my writing their resume or cover letter.
Right. Okay. So let's say someone wants help identifying what they want to do for a job. But what are some of the things that you do to help them with that process?
I ask a lot of questions. I even provide a questionnaire for the coaching for the clients to complete. I ask them about their ideal job, and I ask them about the difference in their heart, which is their inner voice, and their head, which is their logical side. I often find that people are in conflict between their head and their heart, and they need to resolve that conflict. So we work on that. Also, if people are still totally unsure of what they want to do for a career, I administer inventories. And the two I like are the strong interest inventory and the Forte assessments.
Okay.
I also ask them to consider a range of careers.
Okay. So it really sounds like this is a great intersection of coaching, but also bringing your skills of understanding humans and what makes them tick to help them figure out what it is they want to do.
You said that well.
So, well, I will say, people ask me, I'm a LPC, I also have an MBA. As an executive, what do you use more? And I said, well, the MBA taught me how to read the facts. Being an LPC is how I manage. And that helped me learn how to really work with people. So I feel sorry for people that don't have a degree in human nature, because I use mine all the time. Well, speaking of being a therapist, one of the things that I find is therapists come in and as a therapist, as clients will come in and they'll always ask me, what should I do? And I always respond with, it's my job to tell you what you should do. I'm gonna help you to figure out what you want to do. So I wonder, do you have clients, do they come in and they say, tell me what decisions, what career choices I should be making, and you tell me?
The way you said that expresses perfectly what happens with clients. Many clients think there is a perfect job to which they need to aspire. And I explained to them, there is not a perfect job for you, and you don't need to find it. You can choose what job you think you'd enjoy. And it's all choice, and it's your choice. So I help them differentiate between, I've got to find the job that I'm supposed to find in my life, versus let me decide, what would I like to do? What would give my life meaning?
Okay. So I know you talked about assessments. Talk a little bit more, maybe if you could, about how you help the client decide what jobs they're going to consider.
Many clients say they want to make a lot of money. Few clients say, I don't care if I make a lot of money.
Right.
One thing that's important to me is to explain to those clients, it's fine to make a lot of money, but I want you to love your job as well. Because if you don't love your job, you're going to come right back to me, and I'd rather you take that money and buy yourself something you want. So it's important for them to decide kinds of jobs that they want and that would make them happy, not just money. So I encourage them to make a list of what you do want. For example, how far from your home are you willing to drive to a job? Or do you want a virtual job? Do you need benefits?
Right.
What else is important to you? And what's the minimum salary that you would accept? Because money is important. It's just not the only thing that's important.
Right. But what's interesting, so I'm also a Gallup certified Gallup strengths coach. And Gallup's, of course, done landmark research in job satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and does a lot of work with companies. And one of the things they've discovered interviewing employees, that while employers and employees will both say money is the most important thing in a job, the reality is, when kind of the rubber meets the road, money may not be the most important thing for a lot of us. And other things like, what's the job environment like? And do I have a manager that I really like? And am I supported? And so a lot of factors come into the thing, is what I see, that are more than money. And I love hearing that you're trying to help them think about some of those factors.
People want to be appreciated, and that's important to them in their job.
Right. Well, there seems to be well, in today's world, there seems to be a lot of lack of appreciation at work for employees. That companies kind of see people as interchangeable cogs, which may be somewhat driving the current Great Resignation, as they're calling it. So it's kind of interesting time to be here. One of the things that I have talked with clients about a little bit when they talk about, well, on a job or how I want to work, somebody might come in and say, well, I want to be, I want to be an executive and work, and I'm willing to work. It's like, okay, so you're willing to work 70 or 80 hours a week at a job. What does that mean that you're going to give up? Like, what are you going to sacrifice to do that job? Some people do it. So I wonder about, kind of lifestyle factors, and how do you work with people to kind of bring some of the more of those, like you mentioned travel, like lifestyle factors to people when they're looking at jobs?
As you mentioned, people want more than just money. And most of my clients these days want an entire lifestyle. They want their job to fit into their life. They don't want to fit their life into their job. So they're wanting jobs with less overtime. They want jobs that allow them to have time with their family and their friends and have some hobbies. So that's a factor to consider too. What kind of jobs that offer the amount of money that you need to survive exist, that you would consider for yourself. And I also want to go back to something you were saying. People often do not feel appreciated in their jobs. And I tell my clients, you may never get that pat on the back from your supervisor, or you may never get some positive comments about your work. So I encourage you, give yourself compliments. I did a good job on this report, because you may only hear it from yourself and no one else.
Right. Right. I think that's really important. I know one of the things I try to do as a manager is compliment people and, hey, this is where things are working and when things aren't working. But again, my management style may be very influenced by being a therapist. So I tend to look at how I'm managing people a little bit, maybe differently than the average boss out there. So you've got somebody that kind of talked about maybe some jobs that interest them, what's going to fit the lifestyle requirements, more than just the money. So they've got an idea of what jobs might interest them. How do you coach them on their next steps?
People can know what they want to do, but to actually get a job, they have to have a job interview. And to get to the job interview, they have to have a competitive resume. And the operative word is competitive. They've got to beat their competition. So because I'm a creative and a technical writer, I write resumes for clients, and clients seem unaware of some of the resume standards. So I'll just go over a few of what's common today.
Okay, great.
Resumes need to be no more than 2 pages, unless you're an executive, and then you can have 3. I find particularly college graduates will make mistakes on their resume, that they may have a lot of extracurricular experience and volunteer experience, and they try and cram it in 1 page. It's fine for them to have 2 pages. It's current that under your contact information and your name now, use a summary, not an objective. And the summary summarizes your most important information, your degrees, the kinds of work you've done in your specializations. The jobs need to start with your most recent and go backwards in time, not vice versa, and go back at least 10 to 15 years. And by the way, a lot of people who are over 50 are terrified of age discrimination. So when they list their college or master's degrees, they have the option to leave off the year they graduated to disguise their age. But a couple of things to omit that are out of style now: don't put references available upon request. Don't put supervisor's name. And do have that information available, but not on the resume. And lastly, in listing accomplishments, it's important to quantify. How many customers did you see per day? By what percentage did you increase efficiency or decrease ineffectiveness?
Right.
Numbers are the only way to show how much responsibility you had and how much you implemented. And most of the resumes I read that I haven't written omit the numbers. And that's what makes the difference in a really competitive resume and a non-competitive one.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I do think the age discrimination is very real. Having been through, going to a kind of a local job networking function, and it being full of middle-aged people who, had whole departments that were wiped out, and then 2 months later the departments were recreated with a bunch of younger, cheaper people hired. So I've seen that kind of firsthand. I have a question about that, though, kind of a follow-up, because one of the things it feels like everybody is expected to have these days is a LinkedIn profile. And so, my LinkedIn profile asks when I graduate from college. So I assume if I'm leaving it off the resume, I would leave it off the year off the LinkedIn profile as well.
If you want to disguise your age, you can do that.
Okay.
You know, a lot of companies want the younger people because they're avoiding having to pay retirement benefits to the older people.
Right.
And it's all about money.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think you get some really good work out of people that the return on investment for some people really can be quite high compared to, well, we're saving money up front, but we're not making it in the end. My grandmother used to call that, being penny wise, pound foolish.
I like her wording.
Okay, so we've got an idea of what we want to do for a job. We're getting our resume put together a good way. Hopefully we're going to get an interview. So what are some kind of, I've got that precious interview, right? I finally landed it. What are some things that you work on with your clients about how to do well in an interview?
In an interview, clients need to take advantage of small opportunities. For example, they need to look the interviewer directly in the eye and shake their hands. Now, you may think that's just common knowledge, but I can tell you, when I practiced with clients, they will often shake the first two knuckles. You need to actually connect the web of your thumb with the web of the thumb of your interviewer. And more clients than not do not properly make that contact. They say that 50,000 bytes of information is being conveyed non-verbally in that handshake. So that needs to be a secure one to show I'm confident, I'm ready.
Okay.
Also,
I had not ever put any thought into a handshake like that before.
well, it's important. Also, at the end of the interview, most people will say, "Thank you for your time and consideration." Try to think of something memorable. Look the interviewer right in the eye, shake their hand again, and say something memorable like, "I hope you'll consider me your most enthusiastic applicant." Or, "I know you have a lot of qualified applicants, but when you make your final decision, I hope it's me," and give them a big smile. Lasting impressions are just as important as first impressions, and people don't take advantage of that.
That sounds like a good idea. I have to say, having interviewed so many people in my life as an executive, I have many times had the experience of thinking when the interview was over, this is the person I'm going to hire. And the reason that I've had that, or I'm in that position, is because they've come in and they've been memorable and they've been a standout. Not that they appear, always the most confident person. I don't always trust the person who comes in and says, I can do everything and I'll be perfect. It's like, no, that sounds like a story to me. But they're usually it's that person that does have some way to stand out and be memorable. And it's like, well, even in the moment of doing the interview, it can wash away thinking about some of the other people.
Well, Bryan, I have a question for you. My studies show that people who are managers or hiring someone they're interviewing chooses someone who they think will fit in with the rest of the employees. Do you agree or disagree from your experience?
Like fit in as part of the team culture?
Correct. And get along with each other.
Get along. If I had somebody I was interviewing that I really just felt like wouldn't get along with the group or fit into the group, I would probably be more reluctant to hire them. I don't know if in my experience, I've seen people and gone, oh, this person really is going to fit in well. I'd like to have some diversity to the personalities and skill sets, certainly on an executive team, because I want to be able to kind of attack problems with as broad a skill set and an approach as possible.
It sounds like a wise approach to me.
And again, I think that's part of my therapy training, that there's no one right way to do anything. And so it's kind of nice to have those. Now, if I'm the boss, my job is to help make sure that the team is functioning properly. So I own, as the person in the power position, I have more responsibility for my relationship with my subordinates, and I have more responsibility for my relationship with the team than the team members do for their relationship with me or the team's relationship with me. I carry more weight. So it becomes my job to make sure people are getting along well with each other. And if there's a problem, help them figure it out.
Makes sense.
Well, so we're kind of talking about interviews. I think you gave us a way to make that was a great way to start off with a strong impression during the interview. Are there any other ways that are good to make that strong impression that you coach clients on?
For people to effectively interview, they need to be aware in advance of the most commonly asked interview questions and practice and prepare their answers before they ever go to that interview. So I go over with my clients some of the pretty much you're going to be asked this question,
right,
such as, what do you know about our company? Or why should I hire you? But savvy interviewers today will use what's called behavioral interview questions. Those are questions asking about the past performance of the interviewee to see if that past performance is a good indicator of future performance. So most savvy interviewers will start questions with, tell me about a time when. Mm-hmm. Tell me about a time when you and your supervisor disagreed and how you handled it. Tell me about a time when you had a problem with a coworker and how you handled it. So clients need to be concise in their answers, but show that they handled situations professionally. How they handled them in the past is a good indicator of how they'll handle them in the future.
Right. And what story they pick to tell says a lot too.
Yes, they have to be careful, and I have to be careful with clients to say, don't pick out a story that makes you look bad. Be concise, make sure that the interviewer knows the situation, but then tell the success of why you handled it professionally.
Yeah, I think
mainly supervisors are making sure you didn't punch somebody in the nose or did something that was highly improper.
Okay. Well, speaking of improper, we know that there's some questions that interviewers are legally not allowed to ask. I have not personally experienced that, but it's like, what do you have suggestions to clients? It's like, hey, they ask a question they're not allowed to ask. How do we respond to that?
Well, first of all, you need to be aware of what questions are illegal.
Right.
And I provide a list of questions so that clients will know, don't expect these. You can't ask somebody's height or weight or prepare a picture or what's your marital status or do you plan to have children? There's a whole list of questions that are highly illegal. But some interviewers are not trained interviewers and they don't know it's illegal. Or maybe they do and ask it anyway. In any case, clients need to know what are these illegal questions, and I explain the best way to answer them is in a very kind voice to say, I don't see how that relates to the job for which I'm applying. Now, I'll role play with clients, and the first thing they do is say, they'll ask, how does that relate to the job for which I'm applying? And I explained, no, don't ask. You want to close the discussion for debate. You don't want to open the discussion for debate.
Right. That makes sense. And then I'm kind of the mind, if I'm interviewing someplace and they are asking a bunch of illegal interview questions, that may not be someplace I want to work. If they're wanting to cross that line, then what are the lines are they willing to cross with people they've actually hired?
That's a good point. And I don't know where the line is drawn between the interviewer is not trained to be an interviewer, or they are intentionally asking these questions. Right. And I don't know if you ever find that out.
Yeah, speaking as having been on the other side of it as an executive and a CEO, if my interviewers don't know how to interview, then that also says something wrong about the company's ability to train its managers.
Very good point. I had a client who was being interviewed by an HR rep and the hiring manager. And the hiring manager asked, "How old are you?" Now that's an illegal question. All the client did was shift his eyes to the HR rep. Now, he'd gone through coaching with me. He knew what to say, but I thought he handled it brilliantly. And the HR rep turned to the hiring manager and simply said, "You can't ask him that question."
Right.
He didn't even have to say anything. He just shifted his eyes. I was very, very proud of him.
So yeah, so that sounds like why that company had an HR rep in the room.
Maybe so.
To train it. But unfortunately, my experience has been is most companies these days, they got rid of management training 20 years ago and have never brought it back. And so they just take somebody who's a good performer, they turn them into a manager and don't really give them the coaching that they need to be successful.
You're absolutely right.
So it's an unfortunate situation, but it's kind of the reality where the world is now. Well, so people go to interviews. Of course, they get nervous. Do you have any suggestions on how they can kind of calm their nerves before they go do their interview?
I sure do. Number one, be early. Don't rely on Atlanta traffic. It is very undependable and you could be late. So be early. Check that your hair is in place in the mirror in the restroom. And once you've checked in with the administrative assistant, sit down and just practice deep breathing. Breathe in and slowly exhale. And I tell them to also continue doing this during the interview. It's the best way to calm the nerves. And that's where some counseling techniques are very helpful.
I think that's definitely true. I might add, if you're waiting, don't be hunched over your phone. You don't want the person to, I don't think it looks a good look if somebody walks out to see you hunched over your phone, but B, being hunched over triggers your body to be anxious.
That's a very good point.
So you're better off just sitting back erect, focus on your breathing, and maybe have your notepad in your lap. Which I guess kind of leads into my next question, which is, so what should I take to an interview? I usually have for me personally, I've always had kind of like a little pad that I could write on, and has a copy of a resume in it. So what do you actually suggest somebody take with them to an interview?
I agree with what you just said. And in addition, if the client has any letters complimenting their work, make a copy. Don't give the original, but make a copy and put it in a file folder and offer it. I give an entire session on how to prepare for the interview before you even go. But those are a couple of things you can have. I also advise clients, make a list, word process 3 to 5 references and put them in a file folder that says reference for and then their name, and not offer them, but just in case the hiring manager says, we're going to need references, you can say, oh, I have them right here. It makes you look proactive. Right. But again, don't offer them. It's premature because you may not be considered for the final cut yet.
Okay, that makes sense. I like the idea of literally having, you can put anything that you give them, having a file folder, you can hand it to them in. It
Right,
sounds like instead of loose paper. I like that.
and have typewritten file label resume of. It makes
Right,
you look professional. It gives a good first impression. It shows you've gone the extra mile. You've done something hopefully your competitors have not done.
right.
And it's all again about beating your competition.
And so would you, now with the resume, with that, if I didn't ask you, I should have asked you about cover letters. I got so caught up with talking about the resume. I'm going to assume you like cover letters because you can tailor a cover letter to the organization. So let me ask about cover letters though. And if so, should it be in my resume when I hand it to them at the interview?
I do think cover letters are appropriate when you're approaching a company. If you submit your resume through a website, you may not need to offer a cover letter. There may be no option for one, but often there is one. So the cover letter needs to be word processed. It's an opportunity to show off your business letter writing skills. If you take your resume to the interview with you, there's no need for a cover letter to introduce yourself. You've already been introduced, or you wouldn't be called in for the interview.
Okay.
But I do think they're necessary.
All righty. So I've been to my interview. I think one of the things I have always done in interviews is I do have my notes with me. So as I'm having my talking to them, I always make a point to take notes during the interview. Mostly because I want to remember what's been said or things that may happen. As an interviewer, I've always been impressed when somebody takes notes because it seems to me like they're taking it seriously. So is that something as part of the interview that you see? So I guess I'm kind of hoping you're going to say yes here because I've always done it. But is that something that can be part of making that strong impression in an interview?
I think it's very helpful to take notes. It's hard to remember anything if you're nervous.
Right.
So it's particularly important to write down. Also, I think it's perfectly acceptable to take notes with you. You've already written that include questions you want to ask that you may forget to ask because you're nervous.
Right.
So both are acceptable. I encourage clients to take like an 8.5 by 11-inch legal pad in a portfolio. And remember, hold it in your left hand to leave your right hand free to shake hands.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I as an interviewer, one of the things that it's not exactly the kiss of death, but when I ask the person at the end of the interview, and I've told them I'm going to do this, I open every interview with, here's how the interview is going to go. We're going to ask some questions. Then you'll have a chance to ask questions at the end. When I say, do you have any questions for me? And the person says, no, I don't have any questions for you. That to me, I'm always like, well, how can you not have any questions at all about this job? Because I know I haven't answered them all. And so I love the idea of having questions written out ahead of time, because there's generally going to be some questions that you want to ask.
In my sessions, I actually suggest questions to ask. Some examples include, when do you plan on making a decision and how would you let me know?
Right.
And if I haven't heard from you, by what time, when could I call you and at what number? Also, it's very, very important at the end of each interview, ask for the business card of each person that interviews you. And when you go home that very day, word process a thank you letter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some career counselors and coaches disagree. They think you ought to handwrite it, but I feel adamantly you need to word process it because it's an opportunity to show off your business letter writing skills. So why miss that opportunity? Interviewing is about looking for those little opportunities and taking full advantage of them.
Right.
And then promptly send it.
Boy, sending a thank you letter is seems to be a lost art for a lot of applicants these days. So it's great to get one.
Well, it is. It makes a difference. Because a lot of interviewees do not know that that's proper interview etiquette. Again, if you write it and they don't, it makes you look more competitive.
I once had somebody who, it was a college student who was looking to do a paper or project for school, and it was interview somebody in mental health, and they emailed me and said, "Can I come interview you?" And I said, "That'll be fine." And they said, came in and we did the interview, and I told them everything they needed. And then when we were done, I said, "So let me tell you what happened here, that had you been interviewing for a job, I never would have talked to you." And her initial email to me addressed me by my first name. And I said, if you want to do an interview with somebody, address them more formally. You should have called me Mr. Stevens. And then if I tell you it's okay to call me Bryan, you can start calling me Bryan. And it was a generational thing. And she just was like, "Oh, I didn't even think about that." And I said, that would have been the standout reason to not pick you up. And when I know is when I've had 50 resumes, right? We've posted something and 50 resumes come through, and I'm doing my initial pass. I'm not looking to include people. I'm looking to exclude them on my first pass.
You gave that person good advice, and the studies are showing that on the first cut of resumes, interviewers spend no more than 6 seconds. They're looking, do you have education and basic number of years we need? Call them in. It's just that quick. But I'm glad you educated that person, and that's a very good point. Don't call the person by their first name. It's Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. unless the person gives you permission and ask you to call them by their first name.
Right.
Etiquette is important.
Yeah, it's very key, even though as our world has got more casual. So I know I've experienced that I've gone into an interview, I was excited about the job. This sounds like a good opportunity. And then while the interview is going on, I just get that sinking sensation saying, "Oh, I don't want this job at all." And I'm polite, I'm finishing the interview, but what kind of advice do you have for people after, they've, okay, I really don't want this job, as they're leaving?
Both you and the interviewer, the interviewee and the interviewer are both deciding whether or not it's a good fit.
Right.
And you have just as much a choice as the interviewer does. So if you don't want the job, it's perfectly acceptable to say, "Thank you for your time. I realize there's some factors that are not a good fit for me, and I don't want to waste any more of your time. I don't think this is a good fit for me."
Okay.
I think it's important to remember you're choosing whether you want the job just as much as the interviewer is choosing whether or not they
Right.
think you're a good fit for the job.
That makes a lot of sense. And let's stop wasting time if we need to move on. All right. So, well, hopefully we've done an interview. Things have gone well. They're going to offer us a job at a specific salary. What are kind of the next steps in accepting the offer?
You mentioned a key word, salary. Salary may or may not even be mentioned until you're given the job offer. But what most clients don't know is you have the absolute right to say, "I'm thrilled you offered me this job, but before I formally accept, is this salary negotiable?"
Mm-hmm.
Then I give an entire session on how to negotiate the salary. The key is to ask, not demand. The interviewer or the hiring manager has the perfect right to say, "No, it's not negotiable. This is all we have to offer you." But at the same time, some will negotiate with you and you may get a little more, even a lot more.
Right.
It's important to know what that job is worth by going to some place like Glassdoor.com or Salary.com And before you ever go on the interview, have a good idea of what a job in that particular area of the country that's comparable would pay, so that you'll know if they're being on target with offering you a competitive salary. But
Right.
I encourage everybody to just at least ask and do a whole session on salary and benefit negotiations.
I definitely agree with that. And I think it can never hurt to ask. I've never been offended if somebody's asked. So mostly I as an interviewer have never been wanted to be a salary is a secret sort of person. I've always been able to say, this is the salary we can offer. And let's go offer it. And it may change a little bit depending on the person that we're hiring. This is the salary I can offer somebody with this level of experience, but if I get an applicant with a little bit more, I know as an interviewer, I'm usually talking salary in the interview. Because if my number is too low, actually, many times I talk about salary before the interview. Hey, I'd like to come bring you in for an interview. This is what we're looking at offering. If that's too low, then why waste everybody's time having the interview?
I like your approach.
Yeah, well, I'm not a big fan of trying to negotiate money with people. So that's like, here's the reality. Here's what we can do. Let's do it. And if it doesn't work, let's move on. But I guess companies seem to want to make a game out of it and see, can we get somebody for less than we were willing to pay them?
Oh, absolutely. And I tell my clients, you're probably going to be asked, what are your salary expectations? And I tell them to say it's negotiable, because if they state a salary lower than what the hiring manager planned to offer, that may be what the hiring manager offers them, knowing they'll take it, and they don't want to undercut themselves.
Right.
So I do a lot of coaching about how to answer that question and to expect it.
Right. Okay, so what do? You kind of talk about clients who've got a job or coming in. It's like, and they're like, they're there, you're seeing them, and they're complaining about their bosses or their coworkers or their work situation.
Complaints about bosses and coworkers are common. Some bosses and coworkers are stellar.
Mm-hmm.
Others are less than stellar. Some are actually abusive,
Mm-hmm.
or may even bully. If the boss is the one that's abusive or bullying, it's very unsafe to speak up to their boss.
Right.
Because you don't know if their boss might support them unconditionally. And Georgia in particular is a hire at will state, which means they fire at will. So you could be fired for no job, for no
Mm-hmm.
cause, and that does happen. I encourage clients whose bosses are abusive or bullying them to try to transfer to another boss, because it is risky. It all depends on your company's culture, whether you feel like it's safe to speak up or not.
Right.
Some of my experience shows that when numerous employees under one specific supervisor are either terminate or there's a lot of turnover, that can be an indicator that there's a problem with the boss, but sometimes it takes years to expose that issue. Now, as far as if the coworker is abusive or bullying, it depends on the situation. You do have the option to talk to the boss about that and saying, I need it to stop and there's a problem. I think the very good option is also to consider if your company has an employee assistance program. Usually that's at no charge, and you can talk to a trained counselor about issues at work.
Right.
So I'm a big believer in utilize your EAP as well. But the bottom line is be cautious about speaking up about someone over you, because you have little recourse in most
Absolutely. Yeah.
companies.
And I've experienced that kind of in both directions. But being the supervisor of the supervisor, trying to get to the bottom of a problem can be difficult because nobody wants to talk about it. So, one of the things I like to do is have periodic one-on-one meetings with my direct reports, when I've been in those positions. Right now, I've got a company of one, so that would be a meeting with me, I guess. But what I've found, though, is it can take a while for people to be able to trust me, and that I really am trying to make things work as well as they can. Usually, if I can get one person to kind of open up and nothing bad happens to them, if you've got an abusive boss, now suddenly everybody's willing to talk, and you can take action. But yeah, it can take a long time to fix a problem. And I always would feel so bad about it, be like, here, this is going on under my nose, and I hadn't been able to fix it because I didn't know about it.
Well,
Because people are afraid to talk to me, which is, as your point, perfectly understandable, because I could be not willing to listen to them.
well, typically a manager's manager will say to them, we had complaints about you, handle it. Handle it can mean, okay, I'll just fire the person that complained. I don't want anybody complaining about me, so goodbye.
Yeah, I'm
Trusting
more of
you is hard.
I'm more of, we've had multiple complaints about you. Here's your corrective action plan. Where are we going to be in 30 days? But
Well, I'm glad to hear that there are managers like you. I can understand why employees were reluctant to talk to you. If their manager was abusive, it would stand to the reason they think you might be too, and that it would be held against them. So I think they're wise not to speak up.
I agree. Absolutely agree. And it makes sense. I think a lot of it goes back to, we do not train people to be managers. And some of that and not everybody can do it. Gallup, their research really shows them that only about 10% of people are kind of naturally able to be managers. And they feel that you can train about another 8 or 9% of the population. So if we're generous, that's 1 in 5 people are capable of being managers.
That's really interesting. And I want to make one little touch on the point about coworkers. Something that I'm encountering is that a lot of teams don't have a designated supervisor in the team. And when some people are doing their share and their coworkers share, they resent the coworkers that are not doing their share, and they have no recourse because there's no supervisor. So that's a big issue too.
That is a big issue, of course, and that's a lot like being back in school when you've got group projects.
Exactly. I think it can also mold your future preferences, whether you like to work with a team or work by yourself based on your experiences.
Right. I agree with that. So, well, what do you feel like is kind of the biggest drawback your clients face in terms of careers and job searching?
The biggest drawback that most of my clients face is lack of confidence. And one of the ways that I have noticed they get confidence is after I've written their resume, they can see what they've done and they take pride in it. And my clients tell me that's when they start gaining confidence. When I do write resumes, it takes no less than 2 hours. I'm asking how much, how many, how often, what did you do before that? Tell me your volunteer work. Have you ever had awards? Things they've never even considered. And when they look at the big picture, they can take pride in themselves. So when we practice interviewing and they have a solid resume, they tend to gain confidence.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. That makes sense. What am I actually done? Go back and look at it. All righty. Well, I think I've asked you enough questions. I'm gonna ask you a very broad one here. Is do you have kind of any final advice that you might have for the folks in our audience who are job seeking or will be job seeking maybe in the future?
I do have some final advice. When you choose a job, make sure you choose one not just because of the salary, but also because you think you will love it.
I think those are good words. Those are good words to close with. Well, Terry, I have really enjoyed talking with you today. And so Terry can be found at the www.theprofessionaledgeatlanta.com. I will have all of her web page and the Professional Edge down in the description below for this. And as we say on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. Click the notification bell so that you'll see new episodes that come up. And Terry, I really, again, appreciate you being on with us today.
You're so welcome, and thank you for having me.
All right.